A millionaire spots a shivering, barefoot little girl clutching a tattered teddy bear on the side of the road. Against every instinct to drive away, he stops. He offers her shelter and a promise, a decision that changes both their lives forever. But 21 years later, the tables have turned. The once powerful millionaire has lost everything, drowning in shame and debt. Just as his world seems to collapse completely, a mysterious woman appears in his life, confident, driven, and with a shocking revelation about the past he thought he'd left behind. How did she transform her life, and what could she possibly offer the man who once saved her? The answers will leave you speechless. What happens when a simple act of kindness comes full circle in ways no one could ever imagine? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The rain pounded against the windshield of Nathan Carter's Mercedes like angry fists, making the normally peaceful drive home feel more like a battle against nature. The wipers squeaked back and forth, fighting a losing war against the deluge. Nathan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he navigated the nearly deserted downtown streets, his mind still churning over the day's stressful board meetings. "Just want to get home," he muttered to himself, squinting through the water-streaked glass. The leather seat creaked as he leaned forward, straining to see through the curtain of rain. His expensive suit felt confining and exhaustion pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. A flash of movement caught his eye. Nathan blinked, not sure if he'd imagined it through the rain. But there it was again, a tiny figure huddled against a brick building. His foot eased off the gas pedal as he drew closer, and his heart clenched in his chest. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, stood pressed against the wall. She wore only a thin dress, her bare feet pale against the wet concrete. In her arms, she clutched a bedraggled teddy bear, its fur matted and dripping. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face, dark eyes wide with fear or cold, or both. Nathan's first instinct was to keep driving. It wasn't his problem. He had enough to deal with already, and getting involved with a lost child would only complicate things. But something made him slow the car even more, watching as the girl hugged her bear tighter. "Don't get involved," he told himself firmly. But even as the words left his mouth, another flash of lightning lit up the scene. The girl, shivering now, looked directly at him, and Nathan saw something in those eyes that reached right into his chest and squeezed. He pulled the car to the curb, his hand hovering over the window control. Rain drummed on the roof as he wrestled with his conscience. The girl hadn't moved, but her gaze remained fixed on his car. Her small shoulders trembled with each gust of wind that whipped down the street. "This is crazy," Nathan muttered, but his finger was already pressing the button. The passenger window hummed down just enough for him to call out, "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The girl took a tentative step forward, her teddy bear leaving a trail of water droplets on the sidewalk. Up close, Nathan could see that her dress wasn't just wet, it was torn and dirty. Her dark hair hung in wet tangles around her face. I don't have any," she said, her voice barely audible above the storm. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of that simple statement. When he opened them again, he found himself reaching across to open the passenger door. "Get in," he said softly. "You'll catch your death out there." The girl, who would later introduce herself as Amara, climbed carefully into the car, trying not to drip too much on the leather seats. Nathan noticed how she held her teddy bear close, as if it were her only friend in the world. "Thank you," she whispered, her small voice filling the quiet car interior. Thunder rolled in the distance, making her jump slightly. "It's okay," Nathan said, surprising himself with how gentle his voice sounded. "I'll take you somewhere safe." He pulled away from the curb, glancing at his tiny passenger in the rearview mirror. Despite his usual reluctance to get involved in others' problems, something told him his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. The fluorescent lights of the Child Services office buzzed overhead as Nathan Carter and Amara stepped through the glass doors, bringing puddles of rainwater with them. The night shift social worker, Monica Harlow, looked up from her desk, her eyes widening at the sight of the soaked pair, A well-dressed businessman and a barefoot little girl clutching a waterlogged teddy bear. "Oh my goodness," Monica rushed forward, her practical shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. She grabbed a stack of blankets from a nearby cabinet, wrapping one around Amara's trembling shoulders. "You poor things, let me get you some hot cocoa." Nathan Carter stood awkwardly in the lobby, water dripping from his expensive suit. He watched as Monica guided Amara to a chair, speaking in soft, soothing tones while she worked the office's ancient coffee machine. The little girl hadn't said a word since they'd left the car, but her eyes followed Nathan's every move. "I found her on Maple Street," Nathan explained, accepting a paper towel from Monica to dry his face. "She was alone, no shoes, just standing there in the storm. I couldn't—" His voice trailed off as he remembered the lost look in Amara's eyes. "I couldn't just drive by." Monica nodded, her experienced gaze taking in every detail as she handed Amara a steaming styrofoam cup of cocoa. "You did the right thing, Mr. Carter. Now, I'll need to get some information from you for the paperwork. Standard procedure." While Monica typed at her computer, occasionally asking Nathan questions about where and when he'd found Amara, the little girl sat quietly sipping her cocoa. Her teddy bear lay in her lap, still dripping onto the industrial carpet. After what seemed like hours of forms and phone calls, Monica's face brightened. "Good news," she said, hanging up her phone. "The Petersons can take Amara tonight. They're experienced foster parents, very kind people." At these words, Amara's grip on her teddy bear tightened. Her dark eyes grew wide with fear, and she shrunk deeper into her chair. Nathan felt something twist in his chest at the sight. "The Petersons live just across town," Monica continued, gathering some papers. "They'll be here in about 20 minutes to pick you up, sweetheart." Amara stood up slowly, her blanket sliding off her shoulders. She walked over to Nathan, who knelt down to meet her eyes. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke. "I'll repay you someday." The simple statement, delivered with such earnest conviction from someone so young, brought an unexpected smile to Nathan's face. He hadn't smiled all day, not through any of his meetings or deals, but this little girl had somehow managed to crack his carefully maintained facade. Later, sitting alone in his car, Nathan felt strangely hollow. The rain had finally stopped, but the night seemed darker somehow. He reached over to adjust his seat and felt something soft, Amara's teddy bear, forgotten in her hurry to leave with the foster family. Nathan picked up the worn toy, intending to return it to the office, when he noticed something unusual. There was a small tear in the bear's seam, and peeking out was the corner of what looked like paper. Carefully, he extracted a folded note from inside the stuffing. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the paper. The handwriting was messy, rushed, but certain words jumped out at him. Abuse, danger, and most notably, a sentence that made his blood run cold. Her mother saved her from harm. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nathan Carter's penthouse, but he barely noticed its warmth. He'd tossed and turned all night, his dreams filled with images of a little girl standing alone in the rain. The hidden note from Amara's teddy bear lay on his nightstand, its crumpled edges a stark reminder of last night's discovery. Nathan Carter reached for his phone, mechanically scrolling through dozens of work emails. But the words, "Her mother saved her from harm," kept floating through his mind, making it impossible to focus. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the nagging feeling of responsibility that had settled in his chest. "Focus, Nathan," he muttered to himself, hitting the speaker button to return some calls. The familiar routine of business dealings should have been comforting, but today it felt hollow. Even as he discussed profit margins and quarterly projections, his eyes kept drifting to the note. Later that morning, Nathan Carter stepped into his corner office at Carter & Langford Investments. The space screamed success: mahogany furniture, abstract art, and a view of the city that most people only saw in magazines. His business partner, David Langford, was already waiting for him. "You look like hell," David said bluntly, his perfectly pressed suit a sharp contrast to Nathan's slightly disheveled appearance. "Late night with clients?" Nathan Carter sank into his leather chair, shaking his head. "No, actually, I helped this kid last night," Found her on the street in the rain. David Langford's eyebrows shot up. A kid? Since when do you play Good Samaritan? He laughed, but there was an edge to it. We've got the Morrison merger coming up next week. That's where your head needs to be. I know. Nathan Carter tried to focus on the stack of documents David was spreading across his desk. It's just nothing, David cut in, his voice sharp. Look, Nathan, I get it. You're feeling charitable, but we didn't build this company by getting distracted by every sob story that comes along. The Morrison deal could double our holdings. Nathan Carter nodded automatically, but something in David's dismissive tone bothered him. Had they always been this cold? That evening, back in his penthouse, Nathan Carter stood at his window, watching the city lights flicker to life. The note sat on his coffee table, its mysterious warning impossible to ignore. What exactly had Amara's mother saved her from? And was she truly safe now? Before he could talk himself out of it, he pulled out his phone and dialed the child services office. After a few transfers, Monica Harlow's tired voice came on the line. Mr. Carter, is everything all right? I wanted to check on Amara, make sure she's settling in okay with the foster family. There was a pause, then Monica's voice softened. She's doing fine, Mr. Carter. The Petersons are experienced foster parents. They'll take good care of her. And Nathan Carter let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Good. That's good. He wanted to mention the note, but something held him back. Without more information, would it just cause unnecessary concern? Thank you, Ms. Harlow. Have a good night. He ended the call, feeling slightly reassured but not entirely satisfied. Amara's words from the night before echoed in his mind. I'll repay you someday. Somehow he had a feeling their paths would cross again. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains in the Fitzgeralds' living room, casting gentle shadows on the worn but comfortable furniture. Lynn Fitzgerald, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, arranged throw pillows on the couch where Amara sat quietly. Would you like some cookies, sweetheart? Lynn asked, her voice warm and inviting. I just baked them this morning. Amara shook her head, holding her teddy bear closer to her chest. The stuffed animal, though recently dried and cleaned, still showed signs of its rainy night ordeal. Lynn noticed how the little girl's fingers kept searching the bear's seams, as if looking for something that was no longer there. That's a lovely bear you have, Lynn said, settling into an armchair across from Amara. Does he have a name? Hope, Amara whispered, so softly Lynn almost missed it. The answer made Lynn's heart ache. Such a grown-up name for a child's toy. Across town, Nathan Carter sat in his office, surrounded by stacks of papers bearing impressive numbers. David Langford paced excitedly behind him, practically bouncing on his expensive leather shoes. The Morrison merger is practically in the bag, David declared, clapping Nathan on the shoulder. We should celebrate. How about dinner at LeBlanc tonight? My treat. Nathan nodded absently, his pen hovering over the signature line of yet another document. The words blurred slightly as his mind drifted to the crumpled note hidden in his desk drawer. Something about David's enthusiasm felt off today, too polished, too perfect. Earth to Nathan. David waved his hand in front of Nathan's face. Come on, this is huge for us. The biggest deal of the quarter. What's got you so distracted? Nothing, Nathan said quickly, forcing himself to focus on the papers before him. Dinner sounds great. Let me just finish these first. David's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Perfect. I've got some interesting proposals to discuss, ways to maximize our returns that I think you'll find creative. As evening approached, Monica Harlow's car pulled up to the Fitzgeralds' modest two-story house. The social worker's sensible heels clicked on the wooden porch steps as Lynn welcomed her inside. They found Amara in the living room, still perched on the couch, still clutching Hope the bear. Monica knelt down to her eye level, her clipboard balanced on her knee. How are you settling in, Amara? Monica asked gently. Is everything okay here? Yes, ma'am. Amara replied softly, her dark eyes serious and watchful. Lynn cleared her throat. Ms. Harlow, there is one thing. She glanced at Amara before continuing. When we were cleaning up Hope, that's her teddy bear, I noticed there had been something sewn into the seam. A note, I think, but it was already gone. Monica's expression shifted subtly, her professional smile tightening at the corners. Gone, you say? She made a quick note on her clipboard. And you haven't seen this note? Lynn shook her head. No, just the loose stitching where it must have been. Monica stood up, her movements deliberately casual. I see. Well, I'll make sure to note that in Amara's file. She paused, then added carefully. I think it might be best if we keep Amara's placement information strictly confidential for now. Standard procedure, you understand. Lynn nodded, but her eyes showed concern as she watched Amara, who seemed to shrink further into the couch cushions, her small fingers working nervously at Hope's worn seams. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nathan Carter's penthouse, casting long shadows across his pristine hardwood floors. He sat on his leather couch, coffee growing cold beside him as the morning news droned on in the background. A reporter's voice caught his attention. And with recent budget cuts to children's welfare programs, many of our city's most vulnerable residents continue to fall through the cracks. Nathan's eyes drifted to Amara's teddy bear sitting on his glass coffee table. He'd meant to return it, but something held him back. The bear's worn fur and slightly crooked smile seemed to watch him, reminding him of Amara's whispered words, I'll repay you someday. He picked up the stuffed animal, his fingers finding the loose stitching where the note had been. The memory of those written words about abuse and her mother's sacrifice weighed heavily on his mind. His phone buzzed with another message from David about the Morrison merger, but for once Nathan didn't immediately reach for it. Instead, he found himself getting dressed with unusual purpose. The rational part of his mind argued that Amara wasn't his responsibility. He'd already done more than most would. But another voice, one that had been quiet for too long, urged him to make sure she was truly safe. At the Child Services office, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Nathan stepped through the door. Monica Harlow looked up from her desk, surprise evident on her face. Mr. Carter? This is unexpected, she said, rising from her chair. Her professional demeanor couldn't quite hide her curiosity. Nathan cleared his throat, suddenly feeling out of place in his expensive suit. I wanted to check on Amara. Make sure she's settling in okay. Monica's expression softened slightly. That's very kind of you. I can tell you she's safe with Lynn Fitzgerald, one of our most experienced foster parents. But I'm afraid I can't share more specific details about her placement. Of course I understand, Nathan said, shifting his weight. It's just, there might be more to her situation than we know. Monica studied him carefully. Mr. Carter, your concern is admirable. Not many people would have stopped that night, let alone follow up. She paused, choosing her words carefully. If you're interested in helping more children like Amara, there are always ways to get involved. Nathan nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside him. The idea of making a difference in children's lives, it was so far from his usual world of mergers and profit margins. That evening, the exclusive LeBlanc restaurant hummed with quiet conversation and the gentle clink of fine china. David Langford raised his wine glass, his smile bright under the crystal chandelier. To the Morrison merger, he proclaimed, and to some very creative accounting that's going to make us look like saints to the tax board. He chuckled, taking a sip. You wouldn't believe how easy it is to move money around when you attach the word charity to it. Nathan forced a smile, but his stomach turned. He thought of Amara's teddy bear sitting on his coffee table, of her small face full of trust that night in the rain. David continued talking about profit projections, but Nathan's mind kept drifting to Monica's words about getting involved, about making a real difference. As David extended his hand across the table to seal their latest deal, Nathan hesitated for just a moment before shaking it, his thoughts still lingering on a little girl and her worn teddy bear named Hope. The morning dew still clung to the grass in Lynn Fitzgerald's backyard as Amara sat cross-legged under the old maple tree. Her small fingers traced patterns in the dirt while birds chirped overhead, creating a peaceful melody that seemed to match her quiet demeanor. Lynn watched from the kitchen window, her heart aching for the little girl who carried such heavy shadows in her young eyes. Taking 2 glasses of fresh lemonade, Lynn stepped out onto the back porch. "Would you like something to drink, sweetheart?" she called softly, not wanting to startle Amara. Amara looked up, offering a tiny nod. As Lynn settled beside her on the grass, she noticed how Amara's shoulders remained tense, like a bird ready to take flight at any moment. "You know," Lynn began gently, "I bet your mother loved lemonade on sunny mornings like this." Amara's fingers stopped their tracing, but she remained silent, her eyes fixed on the ground. Lynn waited patiently, letting the morning breeze fill the space between them. "She liked orange juice better," Amara finally whispered, so quietly Lynn almost missed it. Then, after another long pause, she added, "Thank you for the pancakes this morning. And for the nice bed." Lynn's heart swelled at these simple words of gratitude. "You're very welcome, sweetie. You deserve all of that and more." Across town, in his penthouse apartment, Nathan Carter stood surrounded by open suitcases and pressed suits. His upcoming business trip to Chicago demanded attention, but his mind kept wandering to the teddy bear still sitting on his coffee table. His phone buzzed, David Langford's name flashing on the screen. Nathan sighed before answering. "Nathan, where are we with the Morrison numbers?" David's voice came through, sharp and insistent. "The investors are expecting a full presentation by Tuesday." "I'm working on it, David. The projections will be ready." "They better be. This deal could set us up for the next decade." David's tone grew more intense. "Listen, I've got Thompson and Wallace both interested in expanding their portfolios. We need to strike while the iron's hot." Nathan walked to his floor-to-ceiling windows, phone pressed to his ear as David continued outlining ambitious plans. But instead of feeling the usual thrill of potential success, he felt strangely hollow. His eyes caught sight of a family walking in the park below, a mother holding her daughter's hand, and Amara's face flashed in his mind again. Later that afternoon, Nathan stood on his penthouse balcony, watching the sun paint the city skyline in shades of amber and gold. The gentle hum of traffic below mixed with the occasional distant siren, reminding him of that rainy night when he'd found Amara standing alone on the street. Back in Lynn's home, Amara sat at the kitchen table, carefully coloring a picture. Lynn placed a warm cookie beside her, and for the first time since arriving, Amara offered a genuine smile, small but real. The simple gesture of kindness seemed to crack open a tiny window in the walls she'd built around herself. Nathan loosened his tie, thinking about the upcoming business trip and the mounting pressures from David. He had a life to return to, deals to close, empires to build. Yet something had shifted inside him that rainy night, something that wouldn't quite let him return to business as usual. He turned away from the view, determined to focus on the path ahead, unaware that his single act of kindness would eventually return to him in ways he could never predict. The morning light crept through threadbare curtains, casting dim shadows across Nathan Carter's worn face as he stirred on his lumpy second-hand couch. Gone were the Egyptian cotton sheets and memory foam mattress of his penthouse days. Now, at 58, he made do with what little he had left after the scandal that had stripped him of everything. His modest one-room apartment told the story of his fall from grace. Yellowing newspaper clippings covered one wall, their bold headlines screaming accusations. Carter Industries CEO charged in million-dollar fraud. Empire crumbles. Carter faces federal investigation. Scattered among them were overdue notices and final warnings from utility companies, their red stamps a constant reminder of his current reality. Nathan ran his fingers through his graying hair, wincing at the crick in his neck from another night on the couch. His bed had been sold months ago to cover rent. 21 years had passed since he'd been at the top, and each morning brought fresh pain of remembering what he'd lost. He carefully pressed his only clean dress shirt, the fabric thin from repeated washing. The job interview at Rosie's Cafe wasn't exactly the corporate boardroom, but it was something. These days, something was better than nothing. The cafe sat wedged between a discount store and a laundromat, its faded awning fluttering in the morning breeze. Nathan straightened his tie, one of the few remnants of his former life, and pushed open the door, the cheerful bell chime contrasting with his heavy heart. "Mr. Thompson will see you now," the hostess said, gesturing toward the back office. The manager, a stocky man with kind eyes, looked up from his paperwork. Recognition flickered across his face, and Nathan's stomach dropped. He'd seen that look countless times over the years, the moment when someone placed his face from the news reports. "You're Nathan Carter," Mr. Thompson said, not a question but a statement. "Yes, sir." Nathan's voice came out steady despite his churning insides. "I know what you're thinking, but I just need a chance. I'll work hard. I'm willing to start at minimum wage, even less if necessary." Mr. Thompson's expression shifted between suspicion and pity. "The pay is $8 an hour, no benefits. Most people wouldn't take it." "I'll take it," Nathan said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "I just need work, sir. Any work." After an uncomfortable pause, Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. "Be here tomorrow at 6 a.m. One mistake, and you're done. Understood?" Back in his apartment, Nathan slumped into his only chair, exhaustion and humiliation weighing heavily on his shoulders. His eyes drifted to an old photo album poking out from under some bills. With trembling hands, he pulled it out and opened it to a familiar page. There he was, standing proudly next to David Langford outside their corporate headquarters. Both men beaming, champagne glasses raised in celebration of another successful deal. The photo had been taken just months before David had orchestrated the elaborate scheme that would destroy Nathan's life, framing him for financial crimes while protecting himself. Rage bubbled up inside Nathan as he stared at his former partner's smiling face. With a sudden burst of anger, he ripped the photo in half, separating himself from the man who had betrayed him. David's half fluttered to the floor, landing face up, that same smug smile now seeming to mock Nathan from below. Tears pricked at Nathan's eyes as he surveyed his fallen world. The contrast between then and now was stark, from running a multi-million-dollar corporation to begging for minimum wage jobs, all because he had trusted the wrong person. The marble halls of the city courthouse echoed with purposeful footsteps as Amara strode through the corridor, her navy suit crisp and her head held high. At 27, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had fought hard for her place in the world. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as fellow lawyers and courthouse regulars nodded in recognition. "Amara," called out a familiar voice. Kendra Woods, her colleague from Maxwell and Reed Law, hurried to catch up with her. "I heard about the Robertson case. Brilliant work." A warm smile spread across Amara's face. The pro bono case had involved helping a single mother keep her home after a predatory lender tried to foreclose. "Those are the victories that matter most," she said, adjusting the leather briefcase in her hand. "Yeah, 3 years out of law school and you're already making waves," Kendra said, falling into step beside her. "What drives you to take on so many pro bono cases? Most associates are chasing billable hours." Amara's dark eyes softened as memories of a rainy night 21 years ago surfaced. "Someone once showed me kindness when I needed it most," she said quietly. "A stranger stopped to help a scared little girl. I wouldn't be here without that moment of compassion." Later that afternoon, Amara sat in her office at Maxwell and Reed, reviewing case files when a knock interrupted her concentration. Clarence Reed, the firm's senior partner, stood in her doorway, his silver hair and kind face reminding her of a grandfather figure. "Got a minute?" he asked, settling into one of her visitor chairs. "I've been watching your work, Amara. Your commitment to social justice cases is impressive." "Thank you, sir," she replied, straightening in her chair. "I believe everyone deserves access to quality legal representation." Clarence nodded, pulling out a thick folder. "That's exactly why I'm here. We've been approached about representing a community in the Riverside district. They're facing displacement due to a questionable development project." He placed the folder on her desk. "I'd like you to lead this case." Amara's heart quickened as she opened the folder, scanning the details. "This would affect hundreds of families," she breathed. "It's a big responsibility," Clarence acknowledged. "But you've proven yourself more than capable." "I'll do it," Amara said without hesitation, her voice firm with conviction. These families deserve someone in their corner. That evening, Amara sat curled on her apartment's window seat, city lights twinkling beyond the glass. Her modern apartment was a far cry from the foster homes of her youth, but she never forgot where she came from. On a shelf nearby sat her old teddy bear, worn and patched but still treasured. She reached for the bear, running her fingers over its familiar fuzzy ears. "I kept my promise," she whispered, remembering the words she'd spoken to the kind stranger who'd rescued her that stormy night. "I found a way to help others just like you helped me, Mr. Carter." The TV hummed quietly in the background until a familiar name caught her attention. Amara turned, increasing the volume as a news anchor spoke. In other news, former business mogul Nathan Carter was spotted working at a local cafe, 21 years after the fraud scandal that destroyed his empire. Sources say Carter, who maintained his innocence, has struggled to find employment since serving his sentence. Amara's breath caught as grainy footage showed a gray-haired man in a server's apron, head down as he hurried past news cameras. Her fingers tightened around the teddy bear as she leaned forward, studying the weathered face of the man who had changed her life all those years ago. The austere courtroom felt suffocating as Nathan Carter sat rigidly in his chair, his worn suit a far cry from the tailored attire he once wore in boardrooms. Judge Elaine Porter's stern gaze swept across the room as she adjusted her reading glasses, preparing to address the latest allegations against the former businessman. "Mr. Carter," Judge Porter began, her voice carrying through the hushed courtroom, "you stand accused of embezzling funds from Carter Enterprises during the period of 2015 to 2018. How do you plead?" Nathan's voice came out steady despite his trembling hands. "Not guilty, Your Honor. I maintain my innocence, as I have from the beginning." Alan Westbrook, the prosecuting attorney, rose from his seat with practiced smoothness. His expensive suit and polished demeanor stood in stark contrast to Nathan's weathered appearance. "Your Honor, if I may," he said, producing a thick folder. "We have obtained new documentation that clearly shows Mr. Carter's involvement in redirecting company funds through various shell corporations." Nathan's stomach churned as Westbrook approached the bench with the documents. He recognized some of them, paperwork David Langford had assured him were legitimate charitable contributions. The betrayal still felt fresh, even after all these years. "As you can see," Westbrook continued, his voice dripping with calculated disdain, "the paper trail is quite clear. Mr. Carter systematically drained company resources while maintaining a facade of legitimate business practices." After the hearing concluded, Nathan stepped into the courthouse corridor, immediately surrounded by a swarm of reporters. Camera flashes assaulted his vision as microphones thrust toward his face. "Mr. Carter, how do you respond to the new evidence? Was this a calculated scheme from the beginning? Did you really think you could get away with it?" Nathan tried to maintain his composure, his voice barely audible above the clamor. "I am innocent. These charges are based on manipulated documents and—" "Interesting choice of words, Mr. Carter." Alan Westbrook's voice cut through the chaos as he approached the crowd. "Perhaps you'd like to explain your sudden interest in children's charities just before the company's collapse? A convenient way to hide money, wouldn't you say?" The words hit Nathan like a physical blow, his genuine desire to help others, sparked by that rainy night so many years ago, twisted into something sinister by Westbrook's implications. The memory of a small girl with a teddy bear flashed through his mind, but he pushed it away, focusing on the present crisis. Unable to bear the accusations any longer, Nathan slipped away from the press gaggle, finding refuge in a side corridor. His shoulders slumped as he leaned against the cool marble wall, the weight of his situation pressing down on him. In another wing of the courthouse, Amara walked briskly through an empty corridor, still riding the high of her successful morning hearing. Her heels echoed off the walls as she checked her phone for messages. A movement at the far end of the hallway caught her attention, and she glanced up to see a gray-haired man in a worn suit disappearing around a corner. Something about his bearing, the way he carried himself despite his obvious troubles, triggered a distant memory. Amara paused mid-step, a strange sensation washing over her. The feeling of recognition was so strong it made her breath catch, but she couldn't quite place why. She stood there for a moment longer, trying to understand the sudden wave of déjà vu that had overcome her. Shaking her head slightly, she resumed her walk, though the nagging feeling of a missed connection lingered in her mind. The dimly lit hotel bar hummed with quiet conversation as David Langford settled into a corner booth, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the modest surroundings. He checked his Rolex impatiently, drumming his fingers on the scratched wooden table. A man in a nondescript gray suit approached, sliding into the seat across from him. "Everything's proceeding as planned," the man said in a low voice, passing a manila envelope across the table. "The altered records have been properly placed. No one will question their authenticity." David's lips curled into a satisfied smile as he thumbed through the documents. "Excellent work, Jenkins. Nathan Carter won't know what hit him. To think he actually believed all those charitable donations were legitimate." He chuckled darkly, taking a sip of his scotch. The fool always did have a soft spot for lost causes. "The prosecution seems convinced," Jenkins murmured. "Those fabricated transfer records you provided were quite persuasive." David leaned back, savoring his victory. "Look at me now, CEO of my own empire, while Nathan scrapes by in some rundown apartment. Poetic justice, wouldn't you say? He always thought he was better than me, with his moral compass and charitable impulses." Across town, in his sparse apartment, Nathan Carter sat surrounded by boxes of old financial records. The overhead light flickered occasionally, casting shifting shadows across the scattered papers. His tie hung loose around his neck as he frantically searched through document after document. "There has to be something here," he muttered, running his hands through his gray hair. His fingers traced over David's signature on various forms, each one a reminder of his misplaced trust. All those years he was moving money right under my nose. Nathan picked up a particular document, studying the dates and numbers. He remembered David's smooth explanations about these transactions, how they were necessary for tax purposes, how they would benefit the company in the long run. He'd believed every word, never questioning his partner's integrity. "I was so blind," Nathan whispered, his voice thick with regret. Setting the paper aside, he reached for another box, determination etched on his tired face. "I'll find proof, David. Whatever it takes." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of David Langford's executive office. He strode through the glass doors, accepting admiring greetings from his employees with practiced charm. Young interns practically fell over themselves to offer him coffee or schedule updates. "Good morning, Mr. Langford," a fresh-faced assistant called out. The board was thrilled with yesterday's quarterly results. David nodded magnanimously as he settled behind his massive desk. His eyes flickered briefly to a stack of incomplete ledgers in his drawer, and to an open email on his computer screen discussing alternative accounting methods. He quickly minimized the window, his confidence never wavering. Leaning back in his leather chair, David allowed himself a self-satisfied smile. Everything had worked out exactly as he'd planned. Nathan Carter was destroyed, and he, David Langford, was now the respected titan of industry he'd always deserved to be. His smile widened as he thought about Nathan's desperate attempts to prove his innocence, attempts he knew would ultimately prove futile. The bright studio lights illuminated Sasha Monroe's perfectly styled hair as she faced the camera with practiced intensity. The popular morning show, Wake Up America, was in full swing, and today's hot topic had viewers across the nation glued to their screens. "The Nathan Carter fraud case continues to shock the business world," Sasha announced, her voice carrying just the right note of concern. "New evidence suggests the former CEO may have been orchestrating an elaborate scheme for years." Behind her, the screen displayed damaging financial charts and photographs of Nathan looking haggard outside the courthouse. "Our sources, including respected businessman David Langford, have provided documentation showing suspicious transactions dating back nearly a decade." Sasha held up a thick folder for emphasis. "These records indicate systematic manipulation of company funds, often disguised as charitable donations." The camera panned across the studio audience's shocked faces as Sasha continued. "But there's more to this story than just numbers, folks. We've uncovered some interesting details about Mr. Carter's past activities involving children's charities. While nothing illegal has been proven, Certain patterns raise questions about his true motivations. In her sleek downtown office, Amara sat frozen at her desk, coffee forgotten in her hand as she watched the broadcast on her computer screen. Her colleague Kendra Woods leaned against the doorframe, shaking her head. "Can you believe this Carter scandal?" Kendra asked. "It's all anyone's talking about." Amara barely heard her. Her mind raced back to that rainy night 21 years ago. A scared little girl, a kind stranger in an expensive car, and a teddy bear with a hidden note. The man on the screen, despite the years and worn appearance, was unmistakably her rescuer. "Kendra," Amara said slowly, "I need to look into something." She minimized the video and began typing rapidly, pulling up old business records and news archives. "That man saved my life when I was a child." "What?" Kendra moved closer, intrigued. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious." Amara's fingers flew across the keyboard as she dug deeper into Nathan Carter's past dealings. "These accusations don't add up. The man I met had genuine compassion. There has to be more to this story." Across town, Nathan Carter sat in his dimly lit apartment, watching the talk show replay with growing despair. The TV cast flickering shadows across his tired face as Sasha Monroe's voice filled the small room with accusations. "They're crucifying me, Marcus," Nathan said to his old friend, who sat nearby on a worn armchair. "David's feeding them exactly what they want to hear." Marcus Tran, a former business associate who'd stuck by Nathan through the scandal, shifted uncomfortably. "You need to be careful, Nathan. David Langford has connections everywhere. He'll do anything to keep his reputation intact." "What reputation?" Nathan burst out, gesturing at the TV. "He built his success on lies and betrayal, and now he's using these talk shows to destroy what's left of my name." He slumped back into the couch, running his hands through his graying hair. "I trusted him, Marcus. For years, I trusted him completely." "I know," Marcus said quietly, watching his friend with concern. "But going up against him now, it could make things even worse." Nathan stared at the screen where Sasha Monroe was now displaying more evidence of his supposed crimes. The weight of public judgment pressed down on him like a physical force, crushing what remained of his hope for justice. The law firm's library was silent except for the gentle hum of Amara's laptop and the rustling of papers. Early morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden tables. Amara had been there since dawn, her suit jacket draped over a chair and her normally neat hair slightly disheveled from running her fingers through it in concentration. Spreadsheets and financial documents covered the table around her. As she cross-referenced dates and transactions, a pattern began to emerge. Her heart beat faster as she noticed something crucial. The timing of suspicious transfers matched perfectly with David Langford's known business dealings, not Nathan Carter's activities. "These numbers don't add up," she whispered to herself, reaching for another stack of papers. The more she dug, the clearer it became. The transactions that had condemned Nathan Carter bore subtle signatures of David Langford's past deals. The same shell companies, similar timing patterns, identical methods of concealment. Amara sat back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly. "He was framed," she said softly, the weight of the discovery settling over her. All this time, Nathan Carter was innocent. Across town, Nathan stood behind the counter of Morrison's General Store, a far cry from his former executive suite. His name tag was slightly crooked on his plain blue vest as he rang up items for customers who mostly avoided eye contact. "Wait a minute," a burly man squinted at him while Nathan scanned his items. "I know you. You're that crook from the news. The one who stole all that money." Nathan's hands froze over the register. Other customers turned to stare, and whispers filled the small store. "Sir, I'm just trying to do my job," Nathan said quietly, fighting to keep his voice steady. "My cousin lost his pension because of people like you." The man's voice grew louder. "Rich guys thinking they can just take whatever they want." The store manager appeared, trying to defuse the situation, but the damage was done. Red-faced and shaking, Nathan muttered, "I need a minute," and stepped out through the back door into the alley. In the narrow space between buildings, Nathan leaned against the brick wall, tears of frustration welling in his eyes. His shoulders shook as he tried to contain his emotions. 20 years of building a reputation, of helping others destroyed by betrayal and lies. From the street, Amara watched him discreetly. Her heart ached seeing the once confident man who had saved her now broken by circumstance. She took a step forward, then stopped herself. Not yet. First, she needed to build an ironclad case. Back at her firm that evening, Amara spread her findings across Clarence Reed's impressive mahogany desk. The senior partner listened intently as she connected the dots, showing how David Langford had orchestrated the entire fraud. "The evidence is compelling," Clarence admitted, adjusting his reading glasses. "But going up against David Langford won't be easy. He has powerful friends." "I know the risks," Amara replied, her voice firm. "But this man saved my life when I was a child. He showed kindness when no one else would." She gathered the documents with determined movements. "I owe him everything. Now it's my turn to save his life." Clarence studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Take the case. Pro bono. The firm will support you." Amara clutched the files to her chest, feeling the weight of both the evidence and her mission. "Thank you, Clarence. I won't let you down." The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Clarence Reed's corner office, casting a warm glow over the leather chairs and polished wooden furniture. Amara stood before his desk, her posture straight and professional despite having barely slept. She spread out a detailed timeline she'd created, showing the intricate web of David Langford's deceptions. "Here's what we know," she began, pointing to key dates. Langford created a series of shell companies months before the alleged fraud. Each one received small transfers that seemed legitimate at first glance. But when you follow the money, her finger traced the complex path across the papers. Clarence leaned forward, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "And you can prove these companies link back to Langford?" With enough digging, yes, he was careful but not careful enough. Amara pulled out another document. "We'll need to track down former employees who worked in accounting. Someone must have noticed these irregularities." Clarence nodded slowly, impressed by her thoroughness. "You'll have full access to the firm's resources. How many paralegals do you need?" 3 plus Kendra Woods as my second chair." Amara's voice carried quiet confidence. "Time is crucial. The longer Nathan Carter's reputation suffers, the harder it will be to restore." "Granted," Clarence said firmly. "Whatever you need, just be careful. Langford has friends in high places." By midday, Amara found herself seated in a small cafe across from Morrison's General Store. She nursed a cooling cup of coffee, watching as Nathan Carter finished his shift. His shoulders were slumped, his movements mechanical as he removed his name tag and work vest. The sight triggered a vivid memory: rain beating against car windows, the warmth of a blanket around her small shoulders, Nathan Carter's kind voice asking if she was okay. She remembered clutching her teddy bear, feeling safe for the first time in days. The memory brought tears to her eyes. Nathan emerged from the store looking tired and defeated. Amara's hand tightened around her coffee cup as she fought the urge to approach him. Not yet, she told herself. She needed more evidence first, needed to be certain she could help him. She couldn't bear to give him false hope. As evening settled over the city, Amara sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of financial records. Her office lamp cast a warm circle of light as she dialed Kendra's number. "Kendra, I need your help with something big." Amara's voice was determined as she explained the situation. "Nathan Carter's case?" Kendra sounded intrigued. "The one everyone's talking about?" "Yes, he's innocent and I can prove it, but I need help verifying these old company records." Amara shuffled through papers. "There are hundreds of transactions to trace." "Count me in," Kendra replied without hesitation. "A chance to expose corporate fraud and help an innocent man? That's what we went to law school for." Relief flooded through Amara. "Thank you, Kendra. We'll need to work fast." "We'll clear his name," Kendra assured her, "no matter what it takes." Amara set down the phone, her expression hardening with determination as she turned back to the mountain of evidence before her. The truth was there, hidden in the numbers, and she would find it. The fluorescent lights of Morrison's general store cast harsh shadows across Nathan Carter's weary face as he hung up his work vest. His shoulders drooped with the weight of another long day of suspicious glances and whispered comments from customers. The store was quiet now, most shoppers having cleared out as closing time approached. As he stepped out into the mild afternoon air, a soft voice called out behind him, "Mr. Carter?" Nathan turned, his tired eyes meeting those of a young woman in a crisp business suit. There was something hauntingly familiar about her face, the shape of her eyes, the gentle curve of her smile. Then, it hit him like a thunderbolt. The little girl from that rainy night so many years ago. Though she'd grown from a frightened child into a composed professional woman, he could still see traces of that same vulnerable soul he'd once helped. "Amara," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "You remember me." They found themselves walking to a nearby park, neither speaking until they reached a wooden bench beneath a sprawling oak tree. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, creating dancing patterns on the ground at their feet. "That night," Amara began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, "when you found me in the rain, I was so scared, so cold, but you stopped. You gave me shelter." She turned to face him directly. "You changed my life, Mr. Carter." Nathan stared at his worn shoes, shame coloring his features. "That was a different time, a different me." His voice cracked slightly. "Look at me now. I'm barely scraping by, my reputation destroyed. The man who helped you that night, he's gone." "No," Amara said firmly. "He's not gone. That same good man is sitting right here." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "I'm a lawyer now, Mr. Carter. I've been reviewing your case, and I've found irregularities in the fraud allegations against you." Nathan's head snapped up, hope and wariness battling in his expression. "You've what?" "The numbers don't add up. The timeline is inconsistent." Amara's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "You helped me when I had no one else. You gave me a chance at a better life." She touched his arm gently. "You helped me. Let me return the favor." Nathan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I don't know what to say. I can't afford—" "Pro bono," Amara interrupted. "This isn't about money. This is about justice." They stood together at the park's entrance, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Nathan looked years younger, as if hope had lifted some invisible burden from his shoulders. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice uncertain but tinged with the first hints of optimism he'd felt in months. Amara nodded decisively. "I've already started gathering evidence. There are inconsistencies in the financial records, transactions that don't match up. We can fight this, Mr. Carter. Together." Nathan took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "Okay," he said simply. "Okay." They exchanged contact information, and as they prepared to part ways, Amara saw a glimpse of the confident businessman she remembered from her childhood. Battered, perhaps, but not broken. Not anymore. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Amara's law firm conference room, casting a warm glow over the polished mahogany table. Nathan Carter sat with his shoulders slightly hunched, his once confident posture now betraying years of accumulated stress. Across from him, Clarence Reed's experienced eyes studied the former businessman with careful consideration. "Mr. Carter," Amara began, her voice gentle but professional. "These are my colleagues. Clarence Reed, our senior partner, and Kendra Woods, our forensic accounting specialist." She gestured to each in turn, and they exchanged quiet greetings. "Tell us everything you remember about the financial transactions David Langford handled," Kendra prompted, her notebook ready. Even the smallest details could matter. Nathan took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "David always insisted on handling our international accounts personally. He said his expertise would protect our interests." A bitter smile crossed his face. "I trusted him completely. He would present quarterly reports, but looking back, the numbers seemed deliberately confusing." The group spent the next hour mapping out every transaction Nathan could recall, with Kendra taking detailed notes and Clarence occasionally asking clarifying questions. The morning light shifted across the room as they worked, creating a focused atmosphere of purpose and determination. By midday, they found themselves in the dusty archives of Nathan's former company building. The room smelled of old paper and forgotten memories. Kendra methodically worked through stack after stack of yellowed documents, while Amara carefully examined each ledger she could find. "Look at this," Amara called out suddenly, her finger tracing a line of numbers. "These entries from 2019, they don't match the official audit reports." She pulled out her tablet, comparing the figures. "The discrepancy is subtle, but it's there." Kendra hurried over, her eyes widening as she examined the ledger. "The pattern matches what we suspected. See how these signatures differ slightly? Classic signs of forgery." "How much more time do you need?" The building supervisor's impatient voice cut through their concentration. He stood in the doorway, keys jangling nervously in his hand. "We're closing for maintenance in 20 minutes. "Just a few more minutes," Amara assured him, but her movements became more hurried as she and Kendra quickly photographed the most crucial documents. Later that evening, Amara's office buzzed with quiet intensity as they spread their findings across her desk. The city lights twinkled outside her window while they examined document after document under the warm glow of her desk lamp. "These signatures," Clarence pointed out, comparing two sets of documents. "They're definitely forged. Look at the pressure points and the slight variation in the loops." Nathan leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the evidence before him. For the first time in years, a spark of genuine hope flickered across his features. "You mean, you can prove it wasn't me?" "We're building a solid case," Amara confirmed, sorting through more papers. "These documents show a clear pattern of tampering, and they all lead back to David Langford." Kendra pulled out her laptop, typing rapidly. "I've identified 3 former employees who worked directly under Langford during this period. They might be willing to testify about the signature authentication process." "We'll need to approach them carefully," Clarence cautioned, making notes in his legal pad. "Langford still holds considerable influence in the business community." Nathan watched them work, his throat tight with emotion. The team continued planning their next steps, methodically listing potential witnesses and organizing their mounting evidence against David Langford. The truth was finally emerging from the shadows, one document at a time. The morning sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street as Amara's car pulled up to a modest 2-story house. Her heart beat faster as she checked the address again. This was where Melissa Fernandez lived, a former accountant who might hold crucial information about David Langford's schemes. Melissa opened the door cautiously, her eyes tired but alert. She was in her mid-40s with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Ms. Fernandez? I'm Amara Thompson, an attorney representing Nathan Carter." Melissa's expression tightened at the mention of Nathan's name. "I've seen the news about him," she said, hesitating before adding, "Please, come in." Inside, they sat in a sunlit kitchen. Melissa's hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee into 2 mugs. "I worked in accounting at Carter Enterprises for 6 years," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "The numbers, they never quite added up in certain accounts David Langford managed." "What kind of discrepancies did you notice?" Amara asked gently, taking out her notebook. "Large sums would disappear into offshore accounts, then reappear under different project codes." Melissa's eyes darted nervously to the window. "When I brought it up to Mr. Langford, he said it was standard practice for tax purposes, but when I kept asking questions," she swallowed hard. "I was fired the next week. No reference, no explanation." Later that evening, in Kendra Woods' home office, papers covered every available surface. Nathan Carter sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stacks of financial records, while Kendra typed furiously at her computer. "There's so much here," Nathan muttered, running his hands through his gray-streaked hair. "How can we possibly sort through it all?" "We have to," Kendra replied, not looking up from her screen. "Every document could be the one that proves your innocence." Nathan picked up another folder, his shoulders tense with frustration. But as he flipped through the pages, something caught his eye. Wait. His hands shook as he pulled out a memo marked "Confidential." This is David's handwriting. Kendra rushed over, peering at the document. The memo detailed elaborate plans for moving company funds through various shell corporations, with David Langford as the ultimate beneficiary. "This is it," Nathan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "This proves he planned it all." In her apartment that night, Amara paced back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear. "Ms. Fernandez, I understand your concerns," she said softly. "But your testimony could make all the difference." After a long pause, Melissa's voice came through, stronger than before. "I'll do it. Those records need to see the light of day." "Thank you," Amara said, relief flooding through her. "We'll ensure you're protected throughout this process." After ending the call, Amara walked to her bedroom shelf where her old teddy bear sat. She picked it up gently, remembering that rainy night when Nathan Carter had stopped to help a scared little girl. Her fingers traced the worn fur, her heart full of determination to right the wrongs done to the man who had shown such kindness. "I won't fail him," she whispered into the quiet room. The glass and steel elevator whispered to a stop on the 35th floor of Langford Enterprises. Amara stepped out, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The corporate office suite before her screamed wealth and power, all built on Nathan Carter's downfall. David Langford's assistant, Harriet Lowe, looked up from her sleek desk with a practiced smile. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Langford isn't taking unscheduled appointments today." "He'll want to see me," Amara replied, her voice firm but pleasant. "Please tell him Amara Thompson is here regarding Nathan Carter's case." Harriet's perfectly manicured fingers hesitated over her phone. After a brief exchange, she gestured toward the heavy oak doors. "Mr. Langford will give you 5 minutes." Inside the corner office, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city. David Langford stood with his back to the door, hands clasped behind his expensive suit. "Ms. Thompson," he said without turning, "I assume you're here to waste both our time defending a guilty man." Amara moved to the center of the room, her reflection ghosting across the spotless glass. "Actually, I'm here to give you a chance to come clean before things get messy." Now Langford turned, his face a mask of practiced indifference. Nathan Carter's guilt has been proven. The courts agreed, the media agreed, even his former friends agreed. Funny how forged documents can convince people of anything. Amara pulled out a folder. "Like these transaction records with your actual signature, not the ones you doctored to frame Nathan." The slight twitch in Langford's jaw betrayed his composure. "Those records were verified by multiple experts." "Experts you paid off?" Amara raised an eyebrow. "We have a witness, someone who saw exactly how you manipulated the books." Langford's face flushed red. "Get out of my office. Nathan Carter destroyed himself through his own greed. I won't let you drag my name through the mud with baseless accusations." "We both know they're not baseless," Amara said quietly. "This is your only chance to make things right before it all comes crashing down." In the lobby minutes later, Langford's controlled facade had cracked. He grabbed Harriet's arm as she passed, pulling her aside. "Call Jerome at the firm. I need immediate damage control. Then get me everything you can find on this Thompson woman." Amara, waiting for the elevator, caught fragments of their hushed conversation. Her phone buzzed, Clarence Reed's name flashing on the screen. The scene shifted to Clarence Reed's office, where leather-bound law books lined the walls. Clarence sat behind his massive desk, his usual good humor replaced by concern. "Langford's legal team just filed a motion to dismiss," he said, sliding a document across to Amara. "They're claiming harassment and lack of evidence." Amara scanned the motion, her jaw tightening. "He's trying to bury us in paperwork before we can present our findings." "His influence runs deep," Clarence warned. "Half the judges in this city have attended his charity galas. He's already calling in favors." "So we push back harder," Amara insisted, gripping the arms of her chair. "We have the truth on our side." "Truth needs muscle to fight money," Clarence replied, leaning forward. "If we don't find a way to outmaneuver him quickly, all our evidence might never see a courtroom." The morning sun streamed through the windows of Amara's office, casting long shadows across her desk filled with case files. The peaceful quiet was shattered when Kendra Woods burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement and a thick manila folder clutched to her chest. "You need to see this," Kendra gasped, spreading documents across Amara's desk. "I was cross-referencing David Langford's charitable foundation records with the company's financial statements. Look at these patterns." Amara leaned forward, her eyes scanning the rows of numbers. "These donations, they're being redirected?" "Exactly." Kendra pointed to specific entries. Langford set up a complex web of shell charities. Money goes in looking like legitimate philanthropic contributions, but it comes out somewhere else entirely. He's been doing this for years, way before Nathan Carter's case. Amara's heart raced as she connected the dots. This isn't just about framing Nathan, it's systematic corruption. "There's more," Kendra added, pulling out another sheet. "Remember those suspicious transactions we found? They match perfectly with these charitable donations. Langford wasn't just stealing from the company. He was using charity as a cover." In the courthouse's sterile conference room later that day, Alan Westbrook sat across from Amara and Nathan Carter, his expression guarded as he reviewed the new evidence. The prosecuting attorney's initial skepticism was evident in his furrowed brow and tight lips. "These are serious allegations," Westbrook said, adjusting his reading glasses. "You understand that taking on David Langford means challenging one of the most powerful men in the city?" "We understand completely," Amara replied, sliding another document forward. "But the evidence speaks for itself. Look at the signature patterns, the timing of the transfers, the shell companies." Nathan Carter sat quietly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The weight of years of public shame showed in the tired lines around his eyes. Westbrook's expression slowly shifted as he delved deeper into the files. "These charitable contribution records," he muttered, more to himself than to them. "The pattern is unmistakable." "You prosecuted Nathan Carter based on evidence provided by Langford's team," Amara pressed gently. "Evidence we can now prove was manipulated." Westbrook removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes. "Langford's legal team is formidable. They've got half the judges in their pocket and the other half afraid to cross them." He paused, looking directly at Nathan. "But this is compelling." That evening, in Amara's apartment, takeout containers littered the coffee table as she, Nathan, and Kendra surrounded a whiteboard covered in timeline notes and connection diagrams. "If we present the charity angle first," Kendra suggested, "it establishes the pattern of deception before we even get to Nathan's case." Nathan Carter stared at the complex web of evidence they'd assembled. "I still can't believe you've done all this," he said quietly. "After everything that happened, after everyone else abandoned me." Amara paused in her note-taking, meeting his eyes. "You saved a scared little girl on a rainy night when nobody else would stop. You gave me a chance at a better life." She smiled softly. "How could I do any less for you?" Nathan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing in me when no one else did." Kendra cleared her throat, tapping the whiteboard with her marker. "All right, let's focus on organizing these financial records. We need to make this airtight for court." The morning light filtered through the blinds of Amara's law firm conference room, casting thin stripes across stacks of meticulously organized documents. Amara, Nathan Carter, and Kendra Woods sat around the polished oak table, their faces reflecting both determination and exhaustion from countless hours of preparation. "These financial records are our strongest evidence," Amara said, tapping a thick folder. "They show a clear pattern of David Langford's manipulations." Clarence Reed stood at the head of the table, his experienced eyes scanning the defense petition draft. "The evidence is compelling, but Langford's legal team will fight dirty. They'll try to discredit everything and everyone." Nathan Carter's shoulders tensed. "How can we counter their influence?" "With absolute precision," Kendra replied, shuffling through witness statements. "Every piece of evidence needs to be triple-checked. Every testimony must be airtight." Clarence adjusted his reading glasses. "Your opening statement needs to be particularly strong, Amara. First impressions matter, especially with a case this high profile. I understand, Amara nodded, making notes in her legal pad. We'll emphasize the systematic nature of the fraud and how it extends beyond Nathan's case. Later that day, Amara and Kendra drove to Melissa Fernandez's suburban home. The modest house sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees, their leaves beginning to turn golden. Melissa welcomed them inside, her nervous energy evident in her fidgeting hands. "I've been getting these messages," Melissa revealed, showing them her phone. Nothing directly threatening, but the implications are clear. Kendra examined the messages while Amara sat beside Melissa on the worn couch. "What kind of implications?" "That my current job might become complicated, that my reputation could be damaged." Melissa's voice trembled slightly. "They know where I work, where my kids go to school." Amara leaned forward, her expression both concerned and resolute. "We can provide protection, Melissa. Your testimony is crucial to exposing years of corruption." Melissa squared her shoulders, lifting her chin. "I won't back down. What Langford did was wrong. I watched him manipulate those books, pressure other employees to stay quiet. Someone needs to speak up." That evening in Nathan Carter's modest apartment, the weight of the day's events hung heavy in the air. He paced near the window, his reflection ghosting against the darkened glass. "I can't ask people to risk their safety for me," he said, running a hand through his graying hair. "Melissa has children to think about." Amara stood from her seat at his small kitchen table. "We have protocols in place. The Witness Protection Program, restraining orders if needed. The DA's office is already involved." "But—" "No buts," Amara interrupted gently. "Everyone involved knows the stakes. We're all choosing to stand up against corruption. Together." Nathan turned from the window, his eyes meeting Amara's determined gaze. The years of shame and isolation had taken their toll, but hope was slowly rekindling in his expression. "No one backs down now," Amara affirmed, her voice steady and strong. Nathan nodded, finally accepting that he wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as cameras flashed and reporters jostled for position. Nathan Carter stood tall despite his obvious nervousness, his worn suit pressed as neatly as possible. Amara walked beside him, her briefcase clutched firmly in one hand, her other hand occasionally touching his elbow in silent support. "Mr. Carter, how do you respond to the allegations?" a reporter shouted. "Do you maintain your innocence?" called another. Inside the packed courtroom, Judge Elaine Porter called for order. The wooden benches creaked as spectators settled in, and the air felt thick with anticipation. Amara rose from her seat, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she approached the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and steady, "what you'll hear today is a story of betrayal, manipulation, and the abuse of power. The evidence will show that Nathan Carter was not the architect of fraud, but its victim. Through documented proof and testimony, we will demonstrate how David Langford systematically framed an innocent man while orchestrating one of the largest financial schemes this city has ever seen." Sylvia Kramer, David Langford's attorney, stood next. Her designer suit and perfectly coiffed hair exuded confidence and privilege. "The defense would have you believe a fairy tale," she announced, her voice dripping with condescension. "But the facts will prove that Nathan Carter orchestrated a complex web of deceit, using charity as a cover for his personal gain. Mr. Langford was simply the whistleblower who exposed this fraud." As the session progressed, Alan Westbrook approached the witness stand. The prosecutor's previous certainty about Nathan Carter's guilt had been replaced by a grim determination to reveal the truth. He adjusted his tie and faced the court. "Your Honor, new evidence has come to light that significantly changes our understanding of this case," Westbrook stated. "Financial records show a pattern of manipulation that originated not from Mr. Carter's office, but from Mr. Langford's private accounts." Judge Porter leaned forward, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. "I'd like to see these records immediately." Kendra Woods quickly provided the discovered ledger pages, her hands steady as she handed them to the bailiff. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Porter examined the documents, the only sound the soft rustle of paper. From his seat at the defense table, David Langford shifted uncomfortably. His usual smug expression faltered as he watched the judge's face darken while reviewing the evidence. He leaned over to whisper urgently to Sylvia Kramer, who raised her hand to object. "Your Honor, these documents weren't properly submitted during discovery," Kramer protested. "They were only recently uncovered," Amara countered, rising to her feet, "and they directly relate to Mr. Westbrook's testimony." During the afternoon recess, the courthouse hallway buzzed with activity. David Langford pushed through a crowd of reporters, his face red with barely contained rage. "Mr. Langford, what's your response to the new evidence? Did you falsify company records?" Sylvia Kramer created a path through the press, her sharp elbows and sharper glare clearing the way as they retreated down the marble corridor. In a quieter corner, Amara and Nathan Carter sat on a wooden bench reviewing their notes. Nathan's hands trembled slightly as he held a document. "They'll come at us harder now," he said quietly. Amara nodded, her expression serious but determined. "We knew they would, but we have the truth on our side, and it's finally starting to show." The courtroom hummed with tension as Melissa Fernandez took the witness stand. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap, but her chin remained high as she faced the sea of faces before her. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her features, highlighting the determination in her eyes. "Ms. Fernandez," Amara began gently, "could you please tell the court about your role at Langford Carter Enterprises?" "I worked as a senior accountant for 3 years," Melissa replied, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "I handled many of the company's major accounts and reported directly to Mr. Langford." "And during your time there, did you notice anything unusual about the financial transactions?" Melissa nodded, reaching for the glass of water beside her. "Yes. I began noticing discrepancies in late 2021. Large sums of money were being moved between accounts in ways that didn't match our standard procedures. The paperwork always came from Mr. Langford's office, but the numbers didn't add up." Sylvia Kramer rose from her seat, her expensive heels clicking against the floor as she approached the witness stand. Her smile was razor sharp. "Ms. Fernandez, isn't it true that you were terminated for poor performance?" "No," Melissa answered firmly. "I was fired shortly after I started asking questions about those transactions." "So you admit you were disgruntled about your termination?" Kramer pressed, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Objection, argumentative," Amara called out. "Sustained," Judge Porter responded, giving Kramer a warning look. During the recess, Melissa walked alone down the courthouse's marble hallway, her footsteps echoing off the walls. Suddenly, David Langford appeared, blocking her path. His expensive suit couldn't mask the desperation in his eyes. "You should think very carefully about what you're doing," he said in a low voice. "False testimony can lead to serious legal consequences. I have very good lawyers, Ms. Fernandez." Before Melissa could respond, Kendra Woods rounded the corner, her expression hardening as she took in the scene. "Step away from our witness, Mr. Langford," Kendra commanded, moving to stand between them. "Or would you like to explain to Judge Porter why you're attempting to intimidate a witness?" Langford's face reddened, but he backed away, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. When court resumed, Amara approached the bench with purpose, carrying a document in a clear protective sleeve. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter this into evidence as Exhibit C," she announced, handing the document to the bailiff. "This is a financial record from March 2022, showing Mr. Langford's handwritten notes beside altered figures. Our forensic expert has verified the authenticity of both the document and the handwriting." Sylvia Kramer shot to her feet. "Objection, this document wasn't properly authenticated. We have no way to verify its chain of custody or legitimacy." "Your Honor," Amara countered, "we have both the original document and our expert's detailed analysis. The handwriting matches multiple known samples of Mr. Langford's signature and notes." Judge Porter studied the document carefully through her reading glasses. The courtroom held its breath, waiting for her decision. "Objection overruled," she declared firmly. "The document will be admitted into evidence." From his seat, Nathan Carter watched as David Langford's composed facade cracked slightly. For the first time since the trial began, hope flickered in Nathan's eyes as he saw his former partner's confidence begin to crumble. The morning sun streamed through the conference room windows as Amara spread documents across the polished table. Nathan Carter sat beside her, his tired eyes scanning the papers, while Kendra Woods organized their notes from yesterday's testimony. The atmosphere crackled with renewed energy after Melissa Fernandez's powerful statements in court. Melissa's testimony was compelling, Clarence Reed said, adjusting his reading glasses as he joined them. But we need to reinforce our case with irrefutable proof of David Langford's direct involvement. I've been reviewing old employee records, Kendra announced, pulling out a thick folder. There's someone who might be able to help us, Jason Crow. He was a junior associate who worked late hours in the office during the period when the forgeries occurred. Nathan Carter's expression brightened with recognition. Jason? Yes, he was always there after hours, especially when David was working late on those suspicious transactions. If we can get him to testify about what he saw, Amara added, it could be the final piece we need. Clarence Reed nodded thoughtfully. But approach him carefully. Someone in his position might be hesitant to speak out against David Langford. By midday, Kendra Woods stood in the marble lobby of Nathan Carter's former office building, where Jason Crow had agreed to meet her. The young man who approached looked nothing like the confident junior associate from the company photos. His shoulders were hunched and his eyes darted nervously around the space. I appreciate you meeting me, Kendra said softly, guiding him to a quiet corner. We know you were there during those late nights. Jason's hands trembled as he spoke. Mr. Langford. He didn't know I could see him from my desk. The glass walls, you know. I watched him practicing signatures, Mr. Carter's signatures, over and over. Jason, I understand you're scared, Kendra said, noticing how he flinched at every passing shadow. But an innocent man's life has been destroyed. You have the power to make this right. Langford has connections everywhere, Jason whispered. He'd ruin me. Kendra leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. We can protect you. The truth matters more than his threats. Outside the courthouse that afternoon, camera flashes exploded as Jason Crow approached the steps, looking small in his wrinkled suit. Reporters shouted questions, their microphones thrust forward like weapons. Mr. Crow, are you here to testify against David Langford? What evidence do you have? Is it true you witnessed document forgery? Amara quickly moved to shield Jason from the press, guiding him through the chaos. Remember, she said quietly, you're doing the right thing. We have measures in place to ensure your safety. Jason nodded, his face pale but his steps steadier as they climbed the courthouse steps. Behind them, Nathan Carter watched the scene unfold, his expression a mixture of gratitude and concern for the young man who risked everything to help clear his name. We'll keep you safe, Amara promised as they reached the courthouse doors. Your testimony could change everything. The morning sunlight filtered through the high courthouse windows as Jason Crow took the witness stand. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie, but his voice remained steady when he began to speak. The packed courtroom leaned forward, hanging on every word. I saw Mr. Langford staying late night after night, Jason testified, his eyes fixed straight ahead. He would wait until most employees had left, then he'd access the digital accounting systems. I observed him altering entries and changing dates on multiple occasions. David Langford's face darkened from his seat at the defense table. His attorney, Sylvia Kramer, scribbled furiously on her legal pad. Could you describe exactly what you witnessed? Amara asked, her voice gentle but firm. Yes, Jason continued, gaining confidence. Mr. Langford would pull up the company's financial records on his computer. I could see him changing numbers, moving funds between accounts. He also had practice sheets where he would repeatedly write Mr. Carter's signature until he got it right. A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Judge Elaine Porter tapped her gavel once, restoring order. Sylvia Kramer rose for cross-examination, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Mr. Crow, isn't it true that you were passed over for promotion 3 times under Mr. Langford's leadership? Objection, Your Honor, Amara interjected. Relevance? I'm establishing potential bias, Your Honor, Kramer responded smoothly. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Miss Kramer," Judge Porter warned. Jason straightened in his chair. "Yes, I was passed over, but that has nothing to do with what I saw. I have dated notes documenting the nights Mr. Langford altered those records." During the midday recess, Nathan Carter stood in the hallway outside Judge Porter's chambers, his heart pounding as he overheard fragments of conversation through the partially open door. "The evidence presented is quite compelling," Judge Porter's voice carried clearly. "The documentation, combined with eyewitness testimony." Nathan pressed a hand against the wall to steady himself, overwhelmed by a surge of emotion. After years of disgrace and struggling to clear his name, vindication seemed within reach. Still, he knew David Langford's legal team might have one last trick up their sleeve. When court resumed that afternoon, tension filled the air as Judge Porter took her seat. David Langford sat rigidly, his usual smugness replaced by barely concealed anxiety. "Having reviewed all evidence presented," Judge Porter began, her voice carrying authority through the hushed courtroom, "I find the allegations of fraud against Nathan Carter to be without merit. Furthermore, the evidence clearly demonstrates that David Langford engaged in systematic financial manipulation and forgery." She paused, looking directly at Nathan. "Mr. Carter, you are hereby cleared of all charges related to this matter." Nathan's shoulders began to shake as tears welled in his eyes. Years of shame and struggle crashed over him in a wave of relief. Amara, sitting beside him, wrapped her arms around him in a tight embrace. "It's over," she whispered, her own voice thick with emotion. "You're finally free." As the judge's gavel fell one final time, David Langford sat in stunned silence, his empire of lies crumbling around him. The courtroom began to empty, but Nathan remained seated, overcome by the magnitude of the moment. Justice, at last, had prevailed. The courthouse steps buzzed with activity as reporters thrust microphones forward, their questions overlapping in an eager chorus. Nathan Carter stood at the top of the steps, blinking in the bright afternoon sun, still processing the enormity of what had just happened. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie, overwhelmed by the sudden attention after years of avoiding the spotlight. "Mr. Carter, how does it feel to be cleared?" one reporter called out. Nathan turned to Amara, who stood protectively at his side. His voice was thick with emotion as he simply said, "I owe everything to this remarkable woman. She believed in me when no one else would." Amara stepped forward, her professional demeanor tempered by genuine warmth. Today, justice prevailed because brave individuals like Melissa Fernandez and Jason Crow chose to stand up for the truth. Their courage made this possible. She paused, maintaining her composure despite the emotional weight of the moment. No further questions at this time. Through the crowd, David Langford and Sylvia Kramer could be seen rushing toward a waiting car, their faces tight with barely contained fury. Reporters called after them, but they ducked into the vehicle without comment, leaving a wake of unanswered questions. Later that afternoon, in a quiet corner of the courthouse lobby, Amara and Nathan found a moment of peace away from the chaos. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. They sat on a wooden bench, both physically and emotionally exhausted from the day's events. "I never thought I'd see this day," Nathan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "There were times I believed I'd carry this shame forever." Amara turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Do you remember that rainy night when you found a scared little girl on the street?" Nathan nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "That one act of kindness changed my entire life," Amara continued. "It gave me purpose, direction. It's why I became a lawyer, to help others the way you helped me." "I never knew that one decision would come full circle like this," Nathan replied, his voice cracking slightly. "When everything fell apart, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. But sitting here now, I realize maybe I gained something even more valuable, family." Amara reached over and squeezed his hand, both of them understanding that their connection had grown far beyond lawyer and client. As evening settled over the city, the celebration moved to Amara's office. Kendra Woods poured champagne into paper cups while Clarence Reed beamed with pride at his team's success. The office's warm lighting created a cozy atmosphere, perfect for their intimate celebration. To justice, Clarence raised his cup, and to new beginnings. Everyone clinked their cups together, the simple gesture carrying profound meaning. Nathan took a small sip before setting his cup down, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking," he said, looking around at the group that had become his strongest supporters. "I still have years of business experience, connections. Maybe I could help with your pro bono work, assist families who need legal and financial guidance." Clarence's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "We could certainly use someone with your expertise, Nathan. Many of our clients struggle with both legal and financial challenges." "Then it's settled," Nathan said, his voice stronger and more confident than it had been in years. "I want to help. It's time to give back." The morning sun filtered through the windows of Amara's law firm, casting a warm glow across the polished conference table. Nathan Carter sat between Amara and Clarence Reed, his posture notably different from the defeated man they'd first encountered. There was a spark in his eyes now, a renewed energy that came from vindication and purpose. "The media coverage has been overwhelmingly positive," Clarence said, spreading out several newspapers across the table. "Your story is resonating with people, Nathan. They're seeing the truth now." Nathan nodded, but his mind seemed elsewhere. He leaned forward, fingers drumming thoughtfully on the table's surface. "You know, throughout this ordeal, I've been thinking about how many others might be struggling without anyone to help them, not just with legal troubles, but with basic necessities." Amara's eyes lit up. "Actually, I've been considering something similar. What if we combined our strengths, your business experience with our legal expertise?" "A foundation," Nathan said, the words coming out slowly as the idea took shape. "Something that could provide both legal aid and financial guidance to families in need." Clarence straightened in his chair. "That's exactly the kind of initiative this community needs. We see so many cases where people need more than just legal help. They need comprehensive support." By midday, Amara and Nathan found themselves at the Pine Street Community Center, a modest building with walls decorated in children's artwork. Local volunteers gathered around a worn table, eager to share their experiences with the visiting pair. Maria Santiago, a longtime volunteer, wiped tears from her eyes as she described a single mother working 3 jobs to keep her children fed. "She's so proud she won't ask for help," Maria explained, "but her kids wear the same clothes every day and sometimes they come here just to get a proper meal." Nathan sat quietly, absorbing every word. His hands were clasped tightly together, knuckles white with emotion. Another volunteer, James Chen, spoke about teenagers dropping out of school to help support their families. "These kids are brilliant," James said, his voice passionate, "but they're sacrificing their futures because they can't see any other way." As each story unfolded, Nathan's expression grew more affected. He thought about his former life, the lavish parties, the casual way he'd spent money that could have changed lives. Amara watched him carefully, recognizing the profound impact these stories were having on him. Later that evening, Nathan sat at his small kitchen table in his modest apartment, surrounded by handwritten notes and ideas. The bare walls and simple furniture were a far cry from his penthouse days, but somehow he felt richer than ever. His pen moved quickly across the paper as he drafted the foundation's mission statement. To provide comprehensive support to families in crisis, combining legal advocacy with financial guidance and practical assistance. We believe in empowering communities through education, resources, and hope. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his phone to call Amara. When she answered, his voice was thick with emotion. "This is worth more than any business deal I've ever made," he said, looking at the mission statement. "All those years chasing profits, and I never realized the real value was in helping others." "It's never too late to make a difference," Amara replied warmly. Nathan glanced at his simple surroundings, feeling truly wealthy for the first time in his life. "You're right. And we're just getting started." Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows of the small rented office space, illuminating cardboard boxes stacked against freshly painted walls. Nathan Carter stood in the center of the room, sleeves rolled up, carefully unpacking donated office supplies. Beside him, Amara arranged folders into a filing cabinet, both of them working with purposeful energy despite the humble surroundings. "It's not exactly my old executive suite," Nathan said with a gentle laugh, "but it feels more meaningful somehow." Amara smiled, remembering the stark contrast to his former wealth. "Sometimes the smallest spaces hold the biggest dreams," she replied, sorting through another box of papers. The door burst open as Kendra Woods rushed in, waving a stack of documents with obvious excitement. "You won't believe this," she exclaimed, slightly out of breath. 3 of the grant applications came through. We're getting initial funding." Nathan and Amara exchanged hopeful glances. The foundation's future was starting to take shape, even if their current office looked more like a storage room than a proper workplace. "That's fantastic," Amara said, reaching for the approval letters. "With this funding, we can start helping families right away." Their celebration was interrupted by a soft rustle near the door. A plain white envelope had been slipped underneath, lying ominously on the worn carpet. Nathan picked it up, his expression darkening as he read the message inside. "Stay out of matters beyond your reach," he read aloud, his voice tight with concern. Across town, in a gleaming high-rise office, David Langford paced behind his mahogany desk. The view of the city skyline did nothing to calm his growing anxiety. His personal assistant, Harriet Lowe, sat nearby, taking rapid notes. "This foundation of Carter's," David spat the words out. "It's going to draw attention back to everything. We need to stop it before it gains traction." Harriet nodded, her fingers hovering over her tablet. "What's your strategy, sir?" David paused, a calculated look crossing his face. "Start with the donors. Plant some doubts. Remind them about Carter's questionable past." He smiled coldly. "Make sure they understand the risks of associating with someone who's been involved in financial scandal." "Even though he was cleared of all charges?" Harriet asked carefully. "Accusations leave stains, Harriet, even when they're proven false." David turned to his computer, beginning to draft carefully worded messages to his media contacts. Later that evening, in Amara's law firm conference room, the atmosphere was tense. Nathan sat with his head in his hands, staring at newspaper headlines displayed on tablets and phones across the table. Clarence Reed read one aloud. "New charity foundation linked to controversial business figure. Questions arise about financial management." "Our main donor called," Amara said quietly, her voice strained. "They're having second thoughts about the funding commitment." Nathan looked up, his face etched with worry. "Everything we've worked for? All the families we planned to help?" "Thompson Industries was going to provide 40% of our operating budget," Kendra added, scrolling through emails on her phone. "Without their support?" Clarence spread his hands across the polished conference table. "We need to decide our next move quickly. These rumors are spreading fast." The room fell silent as they all stared at the damaging headlines, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on their shoulders. The foundation they'd dreamed of, barely begun, was already fighting for survival. Early morning sunlight filtered through the foundation office windows, casting long shadows across stacks of paperwork and donated furniture. Nathan Carter stood before the small team, his shoulders squared despite the weight of recent setbacks. The newspaper clippings plastered on the wall behind him told a story of suspicion and doubt, but his voice remained steady. "We can't let these rumors destroy what we're trying to build here," he said, addressing the tired faces around him. Kendra Woods sat with her laptop open, dark circles under her eyes from days of damage control, while Amara leaned against a filing cabinet, her mind clearly working through possible solutions. "I think it's time we face this head-on," Amara said suddenly, straightening up. "We need to hold a press conference. Let people see the real purpose behind this foundation." Her eyes met Nathan's, and he saw the same determination there that had helped clear his name in court. Kendra's fingers flew across her keyboard. "I can reach out to some of the community leaders we've been working with. Many of them have already expressed support privately. They might be willing to stand with us publicly." Nathan nodded slowly, remembering the faces of those they'd met at the community center. "These accusations are trying to paint us as something we're not. Maybe it's time people heard the true story." Throughout the morning, the office buzzed with activity as they prepared for the afternoon press conference. Kendra worked the phones, coordinating with local leaders and media outlets. By midday, a small crowd had gathered outside their modest office building. Under the harsh glare of camera lights, Nathan Carter stepped up to the makeshift podium. Microphones clustered before him, and reporters waited with pens poised. Amara stood just behind him, a steady presence at his shoulder. 21 years ago, Nathan began, his voice clear and strong. I found a little girl alone on a rainy street. That single moment changed both our lives forever. He gestured to Amara, who stepped forward. That girl grew up to become the remarkable woman who recently helped clear my name, but more importantly, she showed me what one act of kindness can do. The cameras clicked rapidly as community leaders took turns at the microphone. A local teacher spoke about Nathan's quiet donations to her school's lunch program. A shelter director described how he had helped families find temporary housing, all without publicity or recognition. Mr. Carter's foundation isn't about money or power, one elderly community organizer declared firmly. It's about making sure no child has to face what Amara once did, being alone with nowhere to turn. The tide of public opinion began to shift visibly as more stories emerged. Reporters' questions grew less hostile, more focused on the foundation's future plans and community initiatives. Later that evening, Amara and Nathan sat in her apartment's small living room, both physically and emotionally drained from the day's events. The local news played quietly on the television, showing highlights from the press conference. I never thought I'd see the day when my story would help save your reputation, Amara said softly, watching their younger selves in the news footage. Nathan smiled, his eyes tired but peaceful. All those years ago, I just wanted to help a scared little girl. I never imagined it would lead to this. You didn't just help me that night, Amara replied, her voice full of emotion. You showed me what it means to make a difference in someone's life. That's why I became a lawyer. That's why this foundation matters so much. David Langford paced his luxurious corner office, his polished shoes wearing a path in the expensive carpet. The morning news played on mute on the wall-mounted television, showing clips from yesterday's foundation press conference. Every time Nathan Carter or Amara appeared on screen, his jaw clenched tighter. This is unacceptable, he snapped, jabbing the remote to turn off the TV. They're making fools of us, Harriet. All our careful work, destroyed by some sob story about a little girl in the rain? Harriet Lowe sat rigidly in her chair, her usual efficient demeanor showing signs of strain. Her tablet rested untouched in her lap as she watched her boss unravel. I want you to dig, David Langford continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. There must be something in Amara's past we can use. Foster care records, juvenile proceedings, anything that might discredit her testimony. No one's perfect. Find me her flaws. Harriet's fingers tightened around her tablet. Sir, those records would be sealed. And given recent events, perhaps we should consider... Consider what? David Langford whirled to face her. Giving up? Letting them destroy everything I've built? His laugh was bitter. Just do your job, Harriet. Whatever it takes. The morning light caught the sheen of sweat on his forehead, and Harriet noticed his hands trembling slightly. For the first time in 15 years of working for him, she saw not a powerful businessman, but a desperate man losing control. By midday, the courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and cameras. David Langford emerged from his black town car, straightening his tie as flashbulbs popped. The federal fraud investigation subpoena had caught him off guard, but he maintained his practiced smile. Harriet Lowe arrived separately, her simple navy suit a stark contrast to her boss's expensive attire. When reporters thrust microphones toward her, asking if she would corroborate David Langford's previous statements about the company's finances, she paused. I've worked for Mr. Langford for 15 years, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. But I cannot and will not continue to support false statements about our business practices. David Langford's facade cracked. His face reddened as he watched his most trusted employee publicly distance herself from him. Camera crews rushed to capture his reaction, but his security detail quickly ushered him inside. Later that afternoon, Harriet sat across from Amara in the law firm's conference room. Her perfect posture had softened, and she placed a thick folder on the table between them. "These are copies of all the documentation I have," Harriet said quietly. "Email threads, meeting minutes, and financial records showing Mr. Langford's attempts to undermine your foundation. He's been calling donors, spreading rumors, and trying to access sealed records." Amara reached across the table and squeezed Harriet's hand. "Thank you. I know this couldn't have been an easy decision." "It wasn't," Harriet admitted. "But watching him try to destroy good people just to save himself, I couldn't be part of that anymore." Amara gathered the documents and walked Harriet to the door. Once she was gone, Amara called Nathan Carter's office line. "Nathan? David Langford's house of cards is finally falling. His own assistant just gave us everything we need." The foundation office buzzed with warmth and laughter, a far cry from its humble beginnings just weeks ago. Colorful balloons decorated the walls, and the aroma of catered food filled the air as volunteers, sponsors, and community leaders mingled, celebrating the official launch of the Carter Woods Foundation for Children in Need. Nathan Carter stood near the window, watching the scene with misty eyes. Just months ago, he'd been alone in his penthouse, crushed under the weight of false accusations. Now, surrounded by genuine smiles and heartfelt conversations, he felt truly wealthy for the first time in his life. Amara gently clinked her glass with a spoon, drawing everyone's attention. Her dark eyes sparkled with emotion as she raised her glass. "Today, we celebrate not just the launch of a foundation, but the power of a single act of kindness," she began, her voice clear and strong. 21 years ago, Nathan Carter stopped his car on a rainy night to help a scared little girl. That girl was me. She turned to face Nathan, her smile warm. "You're more than just my rescuer, Nathan. You're my family, and through this foundation, we'll create more stories of hope and second chances." Later that day, they drove to Lynn Fitzgerald's cozy suburban home. The modest house looked exactly as Amara remembered it. The white picket fence, the flowering shrubs, and the worn welcome mat that had greeted her all those years ago. Lynn Fitzgerald opened the door, her face lighting up at the sight of them. Though her hair had grayed and gentle wrinkles marked her eyes, her warm smile remained unchanged. She pulled Amara into a tight hug before turning to Nathan Carter. "So you're the guardian angel," she said softly, reaching for his hands. "I've heard about you for years. That night you found Amara changed so many lives." They settled in Lynn's comfortable living room, where photos of foster children through the years decorated the walls. Amara's younger self smiled from several frames, showing her gradual transformation from a scared child to a confident young woman. "I can never thank you both enough," Amara said, her voice thick with emotion. "Lynn, you gave me a real home when I needed it most, and Nathan, without you, I might never have found my way here." Lynn squeezed Amara's hand. "We've always considered you a guardian angel for what you did, Mr. Carter. That one decision to stop your car, it sparked something beautiful." Nathan Carter struggled to speak, overwhelmed by the magnitude of how his simple act had rippled through time. Here in this modest home, surrounded by evidence of lives changed through compassion, he felt more successful than he ever had in his wealthiest days. In the late afternoon sunshine, Amara and Nathan wandered into Lynn's backyard garden. The air was sweet with blooming flowers, and birds chirped peacefully in the old oak tree. "I used to sit out here and study," Amara recalled, touching a weathered garden bench. "Sometimes I'd think about that rainy night and wonder if you knew how much you'd changed my life." Nathan smiled gently. "I never imagined that helping one child would lead to all of this. You've given me something I never had in my wealthy days. A real purpose. A family." "That's what compassion does," Amara replied, her eyes shining. "It transforms both the giver and the receiver." Without hesitation, they embraced, holding tight to their newfound family bond. The garden's peaceful atmosphere enveloped them as they stood there, two lives forever connected by a single moment of kindness on a stormy night so many years ago. The autumn breeze rustled through the park trees as Nathan Carter and Amara walked along the familiar path, their footsteps crunching on scattered leaves. They approached the same bench where, not long ago, they had reconnected after 21 years apart. The morning sun cast gentle shadows through the branches, creating a peaceful atmosphere that matched their contentment. "The Foundation's latest reports are incredible," Amara said, her face bright with enthusiasm. "We've already received pledges from 3 more corporate sponsors, and the community support keeps growing." She pulled out her tablet, showing Nathan the statistics. "Look at these numbers. We could help twice as many families by next quarter." Nathan's eyes crinkled with genuine joy as he studied the figures. "You know," he said softly, "I used to measure success by the millions in my bank account. But this—" He gestured to a nearby playground where children laughed and played. "This is real wealth. Every smile, every life changed. That's worth more than any deal I ever closed." Later that day, the sun reached its peak as crowds gathered outside a newly renovated building. The fresh paint gleamed, and a red ribbon stretched across the entrance of what would become the Carter Woods Community Center. Balloons bobbed in the gentle breeze while families, volunteers, and local officials chatted excitedly. Nathan stood beside Amara at the podium, both holding oversized scissors. The crowd fell quiet as they prepared to cut the ribbon. Just then, a small girl, no more than 6 years old, broke away from her mother and approached them shyly. She clutched a handmade card decorated with crayon hearts. "Thank you for helping my mommy find a job," she whispered, extending the card with both hands. Nathan's eyes welled up as he knelt to accept the card. The parallel wasn't lost on him. Another little girl, another chance to make a difference. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the card, reading the wobbly handwriting inside. Amara squeezed his shoulder, understanding the emotion of the moment. Together they cut the ribbon while camera flashes captured the celebration. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, but Nathan barely heard them, still moved by the child's simple gesture of gratitude. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the community center's new playground, Nathan and Amara found a quiet moment away from the diminishing crowd. The day's excitement had left them both emotionally drained, but deeply satisfied. "You know," Amara said, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, "I never properly thanked you for that night. For stopping your car in the rain when you saw a scared little girl." Nathan turned to her, his expression soft. "Amara, you don't need to thank me. You saved me right back." He glanced at the community center, then back to her. "When I lost everything, you gave me something far more valuable. A chance to make a real difference, a purpose." They walked side by side along the community center's new pathway, their shadows stretching long behind them. The sound of children's laughter still echoed from the playground, a testament to the new life they had helped create in this once struggling neighborhood. If you enjoyed the story of Nathan and Amara, I hand-picked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.